Welcome to Rate That, the podcast where four mates are attempting to expand their horizons by trying out each other's recommendations. After Ben's triumphant Rubik's Cube challenge, it was my turn, and I asked the boys to read volume 1 of my favourite comic book series, Saga.
Considering you mentioned the Rubik's Cube episode, I just want to update the listeners on the fact that I can now do the Rubik's Cube without any help from tutorials, and I can do it in under 3 minutes.
Samesy. What nerds, man. We're reading comic books and we're doing Rubik's Cubes.
Yeah, for the listeners out there, I haven't touched my Rubik's Cube, so I'm still the cool one.
As a further update, Tom and Kai have bought speed cubes.
Yes. And can do it under 1.5 minutes.
What? Wow. Okay. Tom is going to be a world record holder in like 2 years' time.
And lonely, very, very lonely. His girlfriend's going to leave him.
You've literally got it on the desk next to you right now.
I was going to say.
I've got 2, and I've got stands for them.
Anyway, I digress.
All right then. Saga. Where the hell do I start explaining this? I've written something.
Written a speech.
I timed it, it's half an hour long.
So, how on earth do I explain the comic book Saga? So, it's an epic space opera fantasy written by author Brian K. Vaughan, and it's beautifully illustrated by Fiona Staples, and it's produced by Image Comics. Issue 1 was first released in 2012, and the author Vaughan has indicated that the story will span 108 issues, of which at the time of recording this, I'm currently on issue 66. These guys have not read 66 issues. So the story is probably best described as Star Wars meets Game of Thrones, and you could maybe also throw in Lord of the Rings and Romeo and Juliet into that mix too. So the story setup, and listeners, please bear with me. The narrative follows our 2 main protagonists who are soldiers on opposite sides of an intergalactic war. Alana is from the planet Landfall, and Marco is from the satellite moon Wreath. They are 2 separate species. So Landfallians are human-like, but they have wings and can fly. The species from Wreath are also human-like, but have horns on their heads and can wield magic. I can feel the listeners unsubscribing as I speak.
Where's that leave meeting button gone?
So, at the very start of the story, Alana and Marco have fallen in love and escaped their respective armies. And literally, the first page, we see Alana giving birth to their child, Hazel. Both parties, respective species, are really not happy that 1, they've defected from the war, and 2, that they've had a child together. The story is often narrated in past tense, we presume, we don't know yet, by a grown-up or maybe teenage Hazel, as she tells the story of this little family on the run, being hunted by their own kind, Prince Robot IV, and various other freelancers or hitmen that have been employed to try and kill or capture them.
Was that it?
Episode over.
Tell me what you think, boys.
And that's the end of my TED talk.
Yeah.
Right, can I just start by asking, Tom, why do you like it, Tom?
I feel judgment in that voice. When I was introduced to it, I was working with a development producer, also called Ben, and he wrote his own like graphic novels and his own comics. And I was saying to him, look, what should I read? Because you can go into those comic book shops and it's just a wall of noise. And he was saying, oh, if you want to start reading something that's sort of just started going and there's a few issues, you need to read Saga. I think I texted him a couple of months later saying, when is the next one coming out? I've bought and read everything that I possibly can. So the reason why I like it, I think it's a real page turner. Often the books end on really, really good cliffhangers. In 2018, it went on hiatus for 4 years.
Ooh.
The last page that you could read in 2018, one of the best sort of cliffhanger endings ever. And I was so glad when it came back. I just think the story is really interesting. The sci-fi galaxy, I think, is really just cool and interesting. But it's quite gritty. It's quite dark. I think if you're a fan of Star Wars, this is like adult Star Wars, and what's not to love?
Star Wars is for adults, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this ain't for kids. The first page, this ain't for kids.
Yeah.
No.
Well, my first note on this actual thing was, after turning on the first page, was the tit drawing was probably unnecessary, because I would have known what she was doing without the drawing of the tits. So on the first page, when you first open it, is just a drawing, a sketch of a boob, which is then you obviously go on to see that she's breastfeeding this new child that we're introduced to.
Yeah.
So immediately I'm thinking, is this going to have unnecessary nudity in it? Is this a dirty mag? Is this what this is going to be?
Breastfeeding, it's the most natural thing on earth, Josh.
Well, yeah, obviously, but you take it a square at a time with comics. And if the first square's a tit, then I'm like, what's going on here?
It's an interesting cover. I think on some of the other versions of like the compendiums that you can buy, the cover is literally that frame. So you go walk past it in a bookshop, and you're like, what's going on that? Oh, that's Saga. Yeah. I'm really intrigued to hear what Ben thought, because Ben said at the end of the last episode that he'd never read a sort of comic book or a graphic novel series from cover to cover.
I have not, but I have now, but I had not.
I thought he was going to say, I have not, and I still haven't.
I haven't bothered doing it. You guys just carry on chatting. I'm out.
I saw the cover and I immediately put it away.
No, I don't know if I read a different version to Josh, but the first page of mine was a close-up of her face, and she's talking about whether she thinks she's shitting or not.
Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah.
That immediately kind of blew all my expectations of what this was going to be out the water. And I was like, oh, okay, this is not what I was expecting. And this is not PG.
What were you expecting then when he first said it? I suppose this is for me, you, and Kai as a question. What were you expecting?
I was expecting something a little more PG and a little more aimed at the stereotypical comic book nerd teenager audience, rather than what this is, which is a more sophisticated adult version. But what were you guys expecting?
I'd never read a graphic novel myself either, but I know what graphic novels entail and what they tend to be. They are tended to be aimed at maybe a more mature audience. You look at things like The Walking Dead. That started out as a graphic novel, and the clues on the tin really, isn't it? It's graphic. So I kind of knew we were going to be in that realm. I didn't necessarily know what the story was going to be about or where it was going to be set. I think the name Saga doesn't necessarily give you anything away. If you hear some titles of some things, i.e., again, The Walking Dead, you kind of can guess what that might be. Whereas Saga, it doesn't scream sci-fi drama type thing. So I didn't know what to expect, to be honest.
Kai, what about you? What have you read? Have you read any? Can you read? No.
Yeah, no,
I know you can obviously read.
Not obviously. I've read Watchmen and Killing Joke. So I've read a little bit, not loads. I tend just to read actual novels. Do you know what I mean? Like actual just books with no pictures or anything like that.
Proper books.
Real books, you mean?
That sounded really patronising. I didn't mean that to come across really patronising, like, oh, I'm so much better than you because I read actual words rather than
you
pictures.
Losers need pictures.
Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect. Well, I've known Tom a long time, so I kind of knew what to expect somewhat, if I'm honest with you. So I know that he likes sci-fi, and we've talked about Game of Thrones. It was interesting. I genuinely thought it was going to be a lot more like Star Wars. It kind of threw me that it was more of a love story in space. For me, it was more that than anything else, which I found quite interesting.
I can see more of the Romeo and Juliet in there than the Star Wars.
Yeah.
But I wonder, is that because obviously we've only read, well, I don't know. I know I've only read to a certain point. So I don't know where it heads to. I agree. I wasn't necessarily expecting that's how it was going to kick off.
It was hard to gauge it properly because we were only reading one full book of it. So we read 6 chapters. So is each chapter a different volume, or is the volume the collection of chapters?
See, I was going to ask this question as well. The word chapter is a third different version that I hadn't heard before. I know issue and volume as the two things.
I just know issue. I don't even know volume. I mean,
But I know
haven't
that
got a
Tom
clue.
wanted us to read the first volume, which I think involves the first 6 issues, but I don't know
Yeah.
chapters.
Google has brought up that think of an issue as a single chapter in a story. Issues of a volume usually come about every month. A volume is a bundle of issues, usually around 5 to 6, but can vary depending on the run or title. Because then you have compendiums, which is a collection of volumes, and those are those massive books you see on shelves, and they're often hardback. They've got a brand new cover that's like a collector's item.
Sounds like words for making money.
It felt like reading the first 6 anyway, the first 6, I'm going to say chapters of this first book. You were just getting to know the characters a little bit more. It was hard to really give a massive opinion on it because it felt like it only just started. Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, I guess that's a good thing because you kind of think to yourself, it's like, well, okay, I want to know more about these. So I probably should read the next few to kind of figure out whether I am on board or not with this journey that you're on in space. Yeah, it was interesting.
It's very much a like Star Wars: A New Hope type thing. A lot of introduction to like characters and world building. Did anyone carry on reading?
Just for the people at home, Tom's actually in his full Darth Vader suit while recording this, helmet and everything.
I read an extra one.
Well, full disclosure now, I've read up to issue 20, so I've read a lot more.
So
Well, there
okay,
you go. I was gonna ask how far did everyone get?
yeah.
Oh shit! No, it's not that I don't want to. I just haven't had the time to actually buy the next one. I'm probably am going to carry it on because I'm actually a little bit more intrigued more than anything.
Yeah, no, I'll take that. I'll take that. It's not I hate this, why the hell have I spent 15 quid on a book that I've since ripped up and burnt?
Well, I didn't.
Oh, I didn't say I hadn't burnt it.
Yeah, I was going to say. The thing is, I'm just not a huge sci-fi fan. I like superheroes and things like that. Not Marvel, more DC, but I like, oh God, such a nerd. I like such a nerdy thing to say.
I mean, says the guy that recommended Rick and Morty, but carry on.
Touche. But I'm not a huge fan of it. But I found this quite interesting. I did find it quite intriguing. The illustrations were really good. On the illustrations, actually, in the book, there's a picture on chapter 3. Essentially, is where you meet the ghost. The picture on that chapter 3 is terrifying. So, just to describe it, it's essentially a ghost of a child in red, and this ghost is split in half with the guts hanging out. And it's just the look on that ghost's face at that point is quite terrifying. I was like, Jesus.
Seems like a good time to throw out that Isabel is probably my favourite character in this entire thing.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Just going to throw that out. Isabel is the ghost, by the way.
Yeah. The one thing that did annoy me, I didn't think, not annoyed me, but it was kind of like, oh, what is that? Was that Prince, who basically has a TV for a head?
Prince Robert the Fourth. This is where it starts to sound really nerdy. So he basically comes from like a species of people that have a human body, but like their head is a TV, and like they can sort of project messages on the screen. So when they're really angry, there'll be a picture on the screen of like a really angry monster. Or if they're really upset, it might be like tears, or if they're in a bad mood, it's like rainfall. But he's probably my favorite character of the whole series so far. The story arc that he goes on further on in the series has been like amazing to read. he's got quite brash in his language, and he's telling people to like fuck off and stuff like that because he's a prince, and throws his weight around quite a bit. But yeah, he dresses like he dresses like something out of like a Napoleon film, but has a sort of 70s TV as a face, like head. I mean, how you come up with that, I've got no idea, but I'm all for it because I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into one of my points that I wanted to discuss about this. Is like, this is obviously set in outer space, and all of the characters can be pretty much anything, including a robot with a human body, etc. But they all seem to have human genitals.
Yep.
I noticed that, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I was like, you could have literally done anything here, but they all reproduce exactly the same way as humans.
What are you thinking about the genitals, Ben?
Because they're in this a lot. They keep cropping up. Yes.
I haven't seen them that many times, so it must get worse.
To answer your earlier question, Tom, yes, I have read on. I think I'm up to issue 20 now.
Wow.
I found that because an issue is relatively short, I could read it quite quickly. So when I needed a 10-15 minute break from work, I would go and quickly read maybe half an issue, and then about 2 hours later I'd go back and finish that issue. So I was finding I was getting through it quite quick. The illustrations and the work that's gone into it is amazing, and you could legitimately put any square of this graphic novel in a frame and put it on your wall as art.
See, Josh has been quite quiet about all of this. I'm quite intrigued. He's been the quietest he's been through any of these podcasts.
So
here we go.
I read an extra chapter. I probably was thinking about carrying on because I was like, I was a little bit intrigued. I was intrigued, but I wasn't like, I need to know what happens next. So I left it a couple of days, and then the curiosity of where the story was going, it wasn't enough to bring me back. And I'm kind of in the opposite camp, and I don't want to say I'm going to say what I think, but I don't want to take away from. This is just my opinion. Like, I don't want to take away from, what these people have achieved and what they've done. It reminded me of when you had to do creative writing at school. And as a kid, when you're writing and they teach you to just write and write and write, and it doesn't necessarily matter what you're writing because the idea just keeps going and going and going. And then you can go back and amend it. That was kind of what this reminded me of. It was like someone had just done like a creative writing exercise and just kept going with it and thought it was like, I'm really in a role on this now. So it wasn't that I didn't enjoy it or I didn't think it was good. It was a case of like, that's what it reminded me of. When I first started reading it, and I text all you going, what's an issue? What's a chapter? I'm a little bit confused. Literally, I'd read the first one. And when I text that group saying what classes is a chapter, secretly I was kind of like, I hope that's it. I hope it's just the first one that we have to read.
What do you mean there's 5 more?
I was like, oh, okay. So there is more that I have to read. Okay. But then once I'd got into it, like I say, it grew a bit. I think the first one just like, I don't know, I think it may have been the whole oddness and the whole like love story aspect of it, because that's why I think it kicks in with that. And I like I said at the beginning, I wasn't expecting that, and then it was a case of, okay, well, let's see where it goes. And obviously it improved, but it didn't pull me in enough to want to know what happens next. And I don't know whether that's because it was the environment that it's in. I mean, I don't mind sci-fi. I like Star Wars and things like that. But this there wasn't a point where I was like, okay, I want to know what's going to happen next. I want to know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And so in the end, I've not gone back to it, and I don't know if I will.
Has it got quite a lot of? Is it like quite a cult following, or is it quite a big audience for it?
I think it's quite big in the sort of graphic novel, comic book world. I don't know how much it's sort of transcended into people buying it who wouldn't necessarily read this type of literature, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think because I've read the headline ones, when you do go into like a comic book shop, it's so overwhelming because there's so many different things to choose from. It's kind
Yeah.
of, when I came with you that once, for example, when you were buying Saga, well, I was
Yeah.
looking around at some of the books and stuff, and I was just like, where do you even start?
Mm.
Like, if you wanted to get into something, there's bar the big hitters. If you wanted to just pick something up and start something, where do you even begin?
Yeah. When I go into Gosh Comics in Soho to buy Saga, I go in, buy Saga, and walk out again because
Yeah.
I don't know what else. I don't know what else to get.
But there's so much choice, which is
Mm.
great. If I'm honest with you, it's great. It's all subjective in it, so what you might like, I might hate, or vice versa. I mean, this
Yeah.
podcast kind of proved that, with the No More Jockeys and the Chimp Empires,
Wait, No More Jockeys is good, man.
Well, okay, we're not bringing this up again. That's season one.
We've had that. We've had that argument. It's still ongoing in private. We won't bring it back to this. Like I said, I've never really read a graphic novel, and I've never really read a comic. So to be given one scratches and itches to think, okay, well, I don't necessarily like this comic book or this graphic novel, but the fact that I've now had a look at one,
Yeah.
maybe there are ones out there that I would pick up and look at it and go, the drawings in this are amazing, the story in this is amazing. I think that's it. If it doesn't, this one doesn't necessarily relate to me because I'm not a mad fan of it, but it doesn't mean there aren't other graphic novels or comic books out there. And then once you've found that one, then does that then open up the whole new thing of going, oh wow, like there's definitely more of these that I'm gonna like, so I need to find those. I mean, to bring it back down to our sort of level in this, not this deep conversation. I've written here, the thing I find with comics sometimes is I don't know who's meant to be saying what, or I read the bubbles in the wrong order, so I have to then go back and read it all over again. So it can take me a good while to read one page of a comic book.
And you haven't read any manga before, which is backwards.
Yeah, that jog on. It's like, I don't know if I could.
It's really bizarre, This is like the most subdued conversation we've had about anything. Like everything else has been quite
aggressive,
emotional.
I feel like this one is very neutral. I've heard from everyone. There isn't like an overwhelming like or dislike side of things. Like it's a very neutral sort of. No one's come out of it like. I think obviously Ben has said that he's enjoyed it more, so he has carried on.
I mean, did I find myself looking up if someone had put all of the volumes on eBay as one job lot? Sure I did.
And it was Tom. Tom did it.
No, unfortunately, no one has done it. Can't find it. But Tom, you did say earlier that there's a word for that, so I need to figure out what that word is.
A compendium?
That's
compendium. Yeah,
that's what I was trying to find, but I couldn't find it.
I had a look online just then, on Amazon. It was like 60 quid for Compendium 1 or something like that.
That's not too bad, I don't think.
What do you mean Compendium 1? Compendium is supposed to be the whole thing.
Yeah, but there isn't the whole thing yet. It hasn't even released. So.
Yeah, them written ill. And you try and sit on the tube end with one of those compendium books, and it is a fucking nightmare.
Well, I was hoping it would be like a box set of like all of the volumes rather than
mate,
it being one book.
It's one large book.
You know those big encyclopedias you had at school, which you had to get out from the library, and they were as big as you were? It's like that.
It's funny, isn't it? Because some people buy stuff like that as like just a table book, like
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like as like just to have on the coffee table, and you go, oh, what's that?
Yeah, Alex had some when we had our flat in London. Alex, my wife for the listeners, she had some like she bought I forgot what it was. Was it a V&A? It was like just a V&A book, and it was just sat on the table, just to look at. No one looked at it. It was just there, just as a table dressing almost. So I was like, oh.
Next time I come to your house, Kai, I'll look through that because my living room is full of that shit. So I love books like that.
That book, it got water damage, so it's not there anymore. And plus, we got rid of that coffee table.
Burnt it with Saga.
Yeah, it's in the
really into book burnings all of a sudden, Kai. I'm a bit concerned, mate.
I would be intrigued to see what this would be like on screen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't been turned into something.
It's because it's not over.
Yeah, maybe.
They're not going to make that mistake again, are they? After Game of Thrones.
That's true.
Also, the CGI or the makeup department budget would be through the roof.
I don't know, because you got to think about like Star Wars, or think about a Game of Thrones. I know their budgets are high, but I don't think it'd be any more than any of those.
There's an entire race with 90s televisions for heads.
Yeah, no, but then there's dragons in Game of Thrones.
Yeah, achievable. You don't watch a lot of fantasy though, Ben. Like I
No.
feel like Jesus. How old is Lord of the Rings now? Like
2001 that came out, didn't it?
something stupid like that. Do you know what I mean? That's outrageous. Like to think that film's that. I mean, gee, let's go all the way back and look at Jurassic Park, 1994, and they made dinosaurs.
So for a 2-hour film, this could go on for a long time.
Yeah, same as Game of Thrones.
I mean, look at Last of Us as well. Most recently, that's probably an 8 to 9 hour game. Compressed into 6 episodes of TV. I think I want to say, but again, the
it was
budget
about
for that
8.
must have
Yeah,
been
something like that.
Yeah, about 8. Yeah, that's what I mean. But
yeah,
and the same with Walking Dead. I think that's 16 seasons, 170 odd episodes.
Yeah, all right, we get it. You love The Walking Dead.
Yeah, but it's in this post-apocalyptic world, isn't it? I think the budgets are there now for the right sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, this could definitely play out on screen for sure, and it would hold up.
But I would be intrigued to see how it would look.
Shit.
Josh's first swear word.
Josh's one expletive for this episode.
I have to get one in there. just to keep it uniform. I've tried really hard. Everyone's moaning. Well, guess what? I've been stabbing myself in the leg with a pen.
One question I did have, Tom.
Yes, Ben.
I have, as I said, read on. The Wreath language that sometimes takes up 3 consecutive pages. Do you ever learn what any of that language to go back and translate those pages? Or are they just pointless bubbles?
Tom speaks fluent Reef and he can translate.
God, Kai, stop making me out to be such a nerd, all right?
I mean, it's a very nerdy question for me to ask.
From memory, I don't think you're sort of ever really taught what they're saying. I mean, you could probably look up how to speak it, and then I'm sure there's a website online, actually.
Written by Tom.
Fuck's sake, man. Oh, now I'm intrigued. I really am a nerd. I now want to go back, find those pages, stick it into Google, and see what comes out. I think we've got to the point where it's probably time to ask if you rate this comic book or not. Who wants to go first?
Overall, I was kind of underwhelmed with it, I think, would be the final say on it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't particularly care for it either. It had elements that were good, obviously elements of originality to it. But again, I think going back to one of my first points was, this might sound a bit harsh, but I think the way it read for me on those early chapters felt a bit like just a uni project and a creative writing exercise. So I think, unfortunately, I didn't rate that.
But you didn't hate it?
I didn't hate it at all, no. There isn't that passion of hate, but I didn't rate it either.
He's back on form. He's back on the not rated.
But in a very sort of subdued way.
It's a commendable non-rating.
Go on then, Kai. What did you think? Did you rate that?
It's hard. I think I haven't read enough of it to really give an opinion. So I can't really not rate that because I haven't read enough of it. But I can't also rate that because I haven't read enough of it.
You're going to read more though, right?
Yeah, I think so. So I guess I do rate that because I'm going to read more.
Okay, next
So-
one, Ben. What do you think? Sorry, Kai, that was very rude.
No, that's all right, mate. I think it's an on the fence. I don't know whether I'm allowed to do that, or do I have to give a definitive?
I think you got to give it definitive.
Until we come up with an actual word for being on the fence, I don't think you're allowed to be on the fence yet.
Yeah, it's called the Rate That podcast, not the Sit on the Fence podcast.
All right. On that note, so far, okay, I'll rate that.
I feel like Tom fist pumping the air
Yeah,
led you to rate that. Then
yeah. I was about to not rate that. If I'm being brutally honest.
Just to upset me.
Yeah, I didn't want to upset you.
Well, thank you for not upsetting me.
Wait till you go 2-footed on my suggestion for a couple of weeks.
Okay. Last but not least, Ben,
yes,
what did you think? Did you rate that?
I think it's fairly obvious from the fact that I have read 14 more issues than I was supposed to. That there was something about this that kept me going back to it and kept me reading. I don't know whether that was the storyline. I don't know whether that was the illustrations. I don't know whether that was because it's an easy read, but I did enjoy reading it and I did keep going back and I did look up whether I could buy the entire back catalogue of what's already been released. So yes, I did rate that.
Nice. So from never reading graphic novels before, Ben's a complete convert. I'll see him down Forbidden Planet next week. Josh, I believe it's your turn to give us all the homework for our next episode.
It is. And because of the rules, I've struggled a little bit because most of the things that I have in the bank for recommending are to either watch something or play something. So that only really left me with listen/read. So I'm going to stick with read, but it could also be listen. I don't read a lot, but when I do read, one of my favourite authors is a guy called John Ronson. Most books that he's written I've read, and they're always very, very enjoyable. And one of my favourites that I've read of his is called Them Adventures with Extremists. I don't know if any of you have heard of him before.
I've heard of him. He's got quite distinctive front covers, right?
Yeah, so he's the author of The Men Who Stare at Goats.
I've heard his podcast and I've really enjoyed his podcast, but I've never read any of his books.
I think he's a great author. Like I say, I'm not a big reader at all. I don't want to class myself as a big reader, but yeah, every book I've ever read of his, I've flown through it like.
Well, colour me intrigued.
Compared to all the others, this has been a very intellectual conversation. So I feel like this may have the same impact. However, because of the content, opinions can be formed. I'm going to say one word. Conspiracy.
Oh,
Have you got a recommendation that you want us to rate? Then why not get in touch via email at ratethatthepod@gmail.com or send us a DM on Instagram at ratethatthepod. We'd love to hear from you. Cheers.